Welcome to the Culture Chatter podcast, the podcast for everything culture and everything heat. And I'm joined here today by my co-host 1110. 1110, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm glad back to get to, chattering with you. It's been a long time since we've recorded, a pod. So super excited to get back into the swing of things. So super excited to be back with you for sure.
100%. A lot of things have definitely happened in relation to the heat since the last time we recorded. Um, and when I say a lot, I really mean one major thing. But a lot of opinions have been spilled about, the Jimmy trade, the Jimmy saga. I don't think that this conversation at any point will really touch on that because you've given your opinions on the TL, I've given my opinions on the TL, and I think that right now the Heat are definitely in a different stage uh, than the last time we discussed them. But the goal still seems to be long-term improvement. There's no indication that there is any major commitment to something like a tank. And with one of the major pieces in the Jimmy Butler trade this offseason, that being Davion Mitchell being extended to a 2-year, $24 million contract. The first year he's making 11.6 million, which is about 7.5% of the cap. And then the next year, that goes up a little bit. What are your opinions on not just Davion, not just what he represents for the team, but the direction that the extension kind of offers the Heat, where you think the Heat are going, and where does he fit in that long term? Because obviously this is not a long term extension; it's more of a prove it deal for him. But it is, a second contract that a lot of people during his time, you know, late in his Kings career, for a big portion of his Raptors career, a large portion of people did not believe that he was going to make it to a second contract in the NBA. So, what are your opinions on that?
Um, Davion last year, he was a really fun watch. I hate to bring this up, but he's a guy I would have loved to have when Jimmy was on the team. But nonetheless, Davion really represented a spark for the team, and he shot really well from three as soon as he came around. So this year, I'm going to be curious to see where his 3-point percentage lands in terms of I don't think he'll shoot like 45% from three, which is which I think is the ballpark that he shot around when he came to the Heat. So I'm curious to see where that settles. But my first reaction when we re-signed him, obviously it was important that we re-signed him. But 12 million a year, I thought it was high. I was expecting more of the 10 mil per year range, but I was still happy that, we were able to get him back. 12 million a year for Davion, I don't think is too crazy, but initially I thought the extension would be at 10 mil a year. And seeing kind of the other guards get signed in the offseason, like Ty Jerome, I think he went to Memphis for 9 million a year. Um, so I thought, okay, we kind of maybe we didn't really um negotiate, or maybe actually we did. We more of took it because it's a 2 year straight. It's no player option or anything. So we have him for those 2 years, whether we decide to keep him or trade him or whatever. So I like the deal personally. And I'm super excited that Davion's coming back, as I think in terms of the Heat identity, with um defense always being a core identity of the team, hustle, playing hard. I think we lost a lot of that scrappiness that we used to have. And Davion, he always plays hard. He always brings it. Great instigator in terms of his effort, getting into opponent's skin. We've kind of lacked sort of those players since guys like Gabe, Caleb, um, Max, and all those other guys ended up leaving. We needed to kind of replenish that. We have a lot of guys out there that may not be much of irritants on defense. So I think having a guy come in who plays with a lot of edge, particularly on the perimeter, which was a spot we desperately needed a lot of help at. I'm really happy to bring him back and see what else he does in the Heat uniform.
No, I definitely agree with you. Just in terms of the salary, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a major overpay. But I would say it's definitely not a bargain deal. It's around his market value. You see guys, obviously you mentioned Ty Jerome, 9 million over, a longer period of time as well. But even somebody like, Dennis Schroeder, who inarguably has had higher peaks throughout his career and even in recent memory in comparison than Davion. He's making what 14 million annually currently with the Kings. So I don't know. It's not a bad salary mark. And me personally, I do really like Davion. I like what he brings. Just to give a rundown on, last season for him, obviously it was a career year from three. And he registered, you know, estimated wins is the totality of your EPM for the season. Basically, EPM adjusted for minutes played and possessions played and stuff like that. So you kind of get a more direct measure of where a player ranks when you consider like their load, their general load. And last year, he ranked 28th among point guards in estimated wins totally, at 4.6, which I think is around where he is, a low tier, bottom tier starting guard, a high tier backup guard who provides a lot. And, that primary value comes on defense. He's really strong. Everybody knows that he's built like a tank, but his lateral agility is incredible. His screen navigation, I mean, sometimes he dies on screens and he lies behind plays, but for the most part, he's able to do so much work before the screen, being physical, adjusting the angles of the ball handlers so they can't even properly set up their screen. Um, he is, in my opinion, a plus screen navigator. According to Second Spectrum this season, on 64.3% of the screens that he defended, his defender, or not his defender, but the opposing screener made contact. In comparison, some DPOY or All NBA level defenders who also guard a ton of ball screens. OG Anunoby this past season was at 74%. Lou Dort this past season was at 71%. Amin Thompson this past season was at 68%. And Davion guarded the eighth most ball screens in the entire league. Obviously, he has the ability to, generate turnovers. He ranked in the 90th percentile in steals plus charges drawn. And I think that is just what he provides on the defensive end, right? Where he's, obviously a hound on the ball, elite isolation defender, a good point of attack defender in general when, guarding ball screens, despite having some limitations in terms of, he's not the most fluid in his hips just because he's so big, but he's not bad. He's not really bad in any athletic category other than length for real. And then, something that I was missing in my evaluation of him, um, when I had viewed him in college or as a King or even as a Raptor, maybe I just wasn't watching enough, but he's actually like a very, very disruptive off-ball defender, right? He's active in the gaps. He's active, catching a body on the boards, even though he's not the biggest. He's one of the first to box out consistently. He's able to recover, and his closeout technique is genuinely perfect. There's a play this past season actually against us when he was a Raptor where he shows some help or he might be tagging a roll. I don't exactly remember. He closes out the hero. He just closes out perfectly, hands up all of that. Hero side steps. I think Hero hits the shot, but that's just something I remember from early on in the season. Like just all around as a guard defender, he's one of the best in the league. But then the offensive side of the floor, that's where more issues are brought up. Obviously a poor free throw shooter. His handle, I think, is I wouldn't necessarily call it a plus. He's very generally turnover prone, even when he's trying to chain together handling moves. Um, and then obviously finishing is just not a major part of his game because of his size. At least in the half court, he's one of the worst finishers in the entire league. But there are also positives. And I would like to hear, how you view some of those positives for Davion. And at I believe he's 26 currently, or this will be his age 26 season. That is, what are some improvements that you think that he can realistically make on that side of the floor.
Um, One thing that I really liked from last year was he was pretty good as a table setter last year. I think he averaged 5 assists per game when he was on the Heat last season, and I believe that was a career high for him. So um, his ability to pass a little bit was something I wasn't really privy to until he kind of came to the Heat. I think another thing is I think this will depend on Spo and the style of offense that he wants to install this season, but his pace, he's really fast and he gets up the court really fast. So if we can lean into that a little bit more, um, getting Davion running transition, him bringing the ball up, him pushing the ball, I think would be a helpful juice to the offense. Um, and I can't remember the statistics on this, but he seemed like a pretty good finisher when he got to Miami. Honestly, he was a guy who got 2 feet into the rim, was able to muscle up guards, get it to a little bit of a floater, lay the ball in. He also had a pretty good steal rate in Miami as well, being able to create points off turnovers, which is something Spo really likes, and I don't think we did enough of last year. So for me, it's can the 3-point shooting fall around 38 to 40%. I don't think he'll shoot
Yeah,
45% from three,
not to
but
cut you off,
yeah, go ahead.
but the finishing definitely improved in Miami. In his games with Toronto, he was at 59.7% from 0 to 3 feet. And then once he's traded to Miami, he finishes the season at 70.1 between
That's
0 and 3 feet.
crazy.
But I think cumulatively, that ends up with a relatively average finishing season at 61.5. And I think that's virtually what we should
For a
expect.
guard, that's pretty good, especially a small guard.
Yeah, it's fine. It's just I'm just talking like, relative to league average. Like finishing isn't a huge part of his game, even though he gets to the rim. And then there's also like, you know, finishing directly at the rim, but also like his floatery touch is not like crazy. Like I kind of consider that somewhat a part of finishing, like directly around the rim, even if it's not 0 to 3 feet,
Right.
those 4 or 5 foot little um like pop shots that he's not like super proficient at. So I mean, I definitely can understand where you're coming from when you describe him as a plus finisher. But you can finish the point about his 3-point shooting
Yeah.
because that's a big thing.
Yeah, the 3-point shooting, I just want to see where that settles at for a full season. He shot close to 45% from three while he was in Miami. I just don't see that being 45% on 3 attempts per game. I don't expect that next season, but I think it's going to be super important that he shoots the three well because he's going to be left open. Um, Teams are gonna want to see if he can actually shoot uh, and hit those shots. So he's gonna have to be able to keep the defense honest there. But another thing for him, in terms of finishing, um, I just want him to continue to put pressure on the paint. He's actually a pretty good passer when he gets into the paint. So I think he's going to be one of the few guys on the team that's it's going to be super important that he continues to sort of get paint touches. And whether it's a driving kick or feeding the ball to Bam or getting a lob to Kalel, which I think the lob stuff he's got to work at. He's not that good of a lob thrower. But things like that in terms of being a factor in the paint due to his speed and his strength, I think would really help the team. But the 3-point shot, I think, is going to be an important swing skill for him. So where that ends up settling at, I'm definitely going to be watching going forward because he shot pretty well last year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the stuff you said. Specifically, your point about pace, right? Like Miami, historically, the last few years has been a team where, they'll look for early advantages, early outlooks. But if they don't find that, if they don't find little creases early in the defense, you're going to milk the shot clock. Basically, they're getting most of their shots, 12, 13,
I
11
don't think they can
seconds
play that way this year, man.
left.
I really hope they
Yeah.
don't.
No, no, no. I agree with you. And I
Yeah.
think that Davion kind of represents a shift in that mindset because Davion is all Davion off the grab is all go. He, plays with particularly great pace. And then it's not just, transition rim runs or anything like that. It's also just off of makes. He'll push it, get you early into your sets. You get somebody flying off of a side action. He gives it up, and then they're getting downhill off of that, right? Or they're creating something off of that. Often it's Hero. Um, at times it was Duncan. Potentially this year, it'll be somebody that we're going to discuss later on. But I also think that Davion did a particularly good job distributing touches, not just in the sense that um, you know, each guy gets a certain amount of shots, but each guy's in rhythm and in relatively optimal spots, and specifically like his pick and roll chemistry with Bam and Bam's affinity for working in that little 8 to 15 feet area. I thought that he did a very good job getting Bam comfortably into those road paths, giving him the ball in spots where he felt comfortable catching and rising versus, you know, I don't think that Bam particularly likes to catch it high, bring it down, get into his set point. I think there are specific spots where Bam likes to catch it and he's most comfortable from, and especially when it comes to floaters, right? If he's catching it high, I'm almost, 80% sure that the floater is going to end in a pretty nasty break. But from certain spots, his touch, that is, his touch shines a little bit more when he's able to, have optimal energy transfer. So I'll definitely say he did a very good job there. Just like you said, setting the pace, being a good table setter. But like you said, the shooting is, the major concern, and not just can he shoot a good percentage, but can he shoot it at a good enough volume to consistently garner closeouts? And from there, um, can he attack those closeouts, make reads off those closeouts? That opens up a lot for the offense because then you get the somewhat, mix and match who's initiating, mix and match who's on the ball versus off the ball. He can be a guy that gives whoever the long-term primary ball handler is a break and allow him to play off the ball or allow him to, you know, stay away from traps and deep hedges and physical POA defense and just allow him to, come off of a zipper, run a side ball screen. He can do that in spot minutes. Obviously, you don't want Davion doing it for an extended period because he's not like a true like engine or not even engine like that goes without saying, but he's not even like a true like starting point guard in a sense. But it is a role that he can fulfill in spot minutes. And if he's able to, garner closeouts and make secondary passes off of closeouts, then he also becomes the type of player who can fit next to these guys because on the other end, he's making up for whoever that is. Because like we discussed, he's one of the best guard defenders like on the planet. Like and that's conservatively. Like I think you can conservatively say he's one of the 10 to 15 best POA defenders in the world right now. And I don't think that most people would disagree. We touched on some of the stats, but one of the stats I didn't touch on, and this obviously will allow him to play a lot longer, is he has one of the lowest foul percentages on contest in the entire league at 8.7. And as a guard, he had a 2% rim frequency on off in the negative, that is, as in teams are getting to the rim 2% less often when he is on the floor versus off the floor, which is, relatively unprecedented for a guard because he's obviously not like a direct rim protector, but he's deterring drives. He's deterring these type of plays that lead to the basket in so many other ways. And then on the other end, he was at plus 3.4% at rim frequency, which, goes to show his strength-based driving in the half court, his transition play, and his speed in transition, and what he can do, just as like a general pace setter. So you have somebody who has like this ability to kind of like play off of his strengths on each end, and he gives you an advantage at a very specific weak point. Like rim play is the Miami Heat's biggest disadvantage on both sides of the floor. Obviously, not in terms of how often, teams shoot against us at the rim, but in terms of efficiency, obviously that's always been an issue. And then getting there on the other end. And those are like the most efficient shots by far. And he have struggled to get those, but he kind of gives you a advantage on both sides of the floor in that very specific aspect. And I think that that's valuable even though obviously he's super flawed in terms of turnovers. He kind of sometimes he just completely I don't know, like he literally just doesn't check his homework on some of these passes. It's like there's a level of arrogance. This I wouldn't even call him like he's seeking out like super crazy passing angles or anything like that. Like he genuinely just like doesn't see guys sometimes, and that can be frustrating. And the aforementioned general efficiency struggles, but to be the 28th highest paid point guard in the or entire league, it's around where he's supposed to be. Making around the vet men, it's around where he's supposed to be, and likely if he continues to progress, especially the progression that he made from last year, the year before, dating all the way back to his rookie year, even though he is a older second year contract player, then it's probably a contract that he's going to at some point outpace or outlive. It does come down to the shot, but I also don't think that if he's a 35% shooter or a 34% shooter, that it makes the deal terrible or anything like that. I don't really think there's a world where this deal ages super bad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's on a pretty good deal. So, especially since it's 2 years straight, no player option. So we'll get him for 2 years and kind of see where it goes. Especially now with this new CBA, a lot of teams want flexibility, optionality, not having a lot of long contracts on their books. So I like the
Hmm.
deal. I think it's fair.
And speaking of, shorter term deals, the Miami Heat also made another move this past all season, and that was in a three-team trade, trading away Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love. And what they got back in that deal was Norman Powell, who's on the last year of a contract that he actually signed a while back. Um, he's on the last year of a 5-year, $90 million contract. This year, he's making $20.4 million, which will take up about 13.2% of the cap. What are your opinions on Norman Powell, what he can provide to the team? And again, focusing on the direction that he kind of indicates for the team. Are you of the opinion that this is a player who is more than likely going to be re-signed? This is a player who's in the long-term um, vision for what the Miami Heat could be in 2027, 2028? Or are you of the opinion that this is more a salary filler, um, more financial based decision? What is your perspective?
Um, I think this trade was driven by Duncan leaving, Duncan moving on to Detroit. We had to replace his shooting somehow on the roster because if you look around the roster, the only shooter we would have is Hero. And we needed another guy to provide spacing, shooting, to make things a little bit easier on offense, which, offense is pretty much a struggle for the Heat. So the fact that we only gave up Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson for Norm is just a home run trade for me. Even if it ends up being, a Terry scenario where Norm forgets how to play basketball here, you didn't give up any draft capital, you didn't give up any assets. You gave up two guys who aren't really in the plans in terms of rotation minutes on a night-to-night basis. And he's an expiring contract. So if it doesn't work out, let his money expire. And it seems to be a free agency class where you can get some solid, maybe role players, within free agency if you decide, to move off of Norm. But in terms of what he can do offensively, I think if he does end up starting with Tyler here in the backcourt, I think they can play off each other pretty well. Going into the season last year, it was, Terry, Tyler, Spo was very adamant that those two guys would work. And the thing with Terry's a really streaky shooter, but Norm has been a really good shooter for a lot of his career. Um, he's a guy who's really good off of catch and shoot. This year he was insane on transition threes. He shot 46% on transition threes this year. He was a guy who was a fringe all-star this year for the Clippers. They had a big role for him in a sense because Kawhi, missed a lot of the year to start, and they needed his offensive juice in order to, keep the team afloat. And he really rose to the occasion. He's a guy who really shoots well from above the break, transition threes. And I think Norm could help us play a more upbeat tempo sort of offense in the sense that, if Bam gets a board, we run up the court. You look for our shooters, Hero, Norm, bring the ball up the court. Norm likes to get into his rhythm, transition three, and he's a guy who can hit them really well. And he's just a more reliable sort of shooter next to Hero. And Hero has played well with another shooter in the backcourt with him. Him and Duncan played pretty well together last season. And I think having somebody who could take some of the offensive load off of him, I think is going to be super helpful. And Norm can provide that. Norm is a guy hits the three really well, also has a nice float game as well in the, non-paint restricted area. And he's a decent finisher. He's a freakish wingspan as well. So I think in his introductory press conference with the team, he spoke about how, he's been slipping on a defensive area, and that's an area he wants to get back to doing. So we'll see what that looks like in terms of um, if the defense, improves a little bit back to more of Norm's level. And, I think as well, some clips that I watched of him during his time with the Clippers, he had really good chemistry with Zoo. So I can imagine that he'll have pretty good chemistry with Bam, as those are similar sort of actions with the handoffs, pick and roll, dump offs. So I think him and Bam, I could see having pretty good chemistry together. So it gives Bam another guy he can run a DHO with, and have two-man actions with. And I think Norm could feast off of sort of those actions and playing off of each other that way. Norm isn't, a playmaker in that way, but he's a guy who could play off of somebody really well. So he can play off the catch, um, and create sort of advantages that way. So I think he would be a really helpful addition. I think he was a needed addition due to the lack of shooting we had on the roster. Terry, he's a guy that we don't anticipate really playing. So we needed another backcourt guy, and I think it slots maybe Davion on the bench, or maybe Spo decides to start all three of them. I don't know. But, Davion being able to come off the bench and provide a new energy, um, change the energy of the game in his disruptive fashion, I think could be a good move for the team. And um, I think it also takes pressure off of Wiggins too, where we don't have to run a lot of stuff for Wiggins like we did last year, where we really try to make it a point to make Wiggins play like Minnesota Wiggins when he's not really that type of player anymore. So I think it really slots guys, I think, better offensively. So I'm curious to see how things look and if it actually, on the court ends up being the way I think it could be.
Yeah. Um, I hate agreeing, low key. I hate agreeing or being overly agreeing that is, but I mean, with almost every point you made, I have firm agreement with. And the first one, just like I made it a point of reference for Davian, I truly think that um Norm as well is just an indication that there's like a different type of pace coming to Heat basketball coming year. Like you mentioned, he is somebody who, if you give him a hit ahead, he will very quickly, get into his patent footwork off of, a swing behind the back. He loves those little side steps. He loves
Loves that move.
eating up big chunks of space east to west as a shooter and getting those type of, you know, early shot clock jumpers off. But he's also somebody that, as you mentioned, does have, a very good career as a finisher so far. Last year he shot 72% between 0 and 3 feet. He's not like a super uh diverse finisher in the sense that he has all these crazy finishing angles and stuff like that. But he is somebody that he loves a little scoop layup. He loves particularly going off the glass, and he has just sublime touch. And he shows up in the floater area as you mentioned as well. And he will get the ball early in offense, and he will push it, and he'll push it, and he'll push it all the way to the rim, or he'll push it and he'll try to get his shot if he's not able to get a clean look. you can reset from there. You're still playing advantage basketball in a sense. So, like you mentioned, he is somebody that gives you a similar role to Duncan, not in the sense that he's the same level of movement shooter, but that movement is a part of his game. And as much as people have praised Duncan for his improvements as a self creator, and they are evident. And I think that Duncan with Detroit, they're going to use him a way that they've used movement shooters at least the last year, and he's gonna have a great year. And I wish nothing but the best for Duncan, but he's just nowhere near the caliber of scorer at all three levels from multiple different play types that Norman Powell is. Like Norman Powell, you mentioned him being like a good shooter. He is just flat out one of the best shooters, secondary or tertiary, I should say, tertiary scorers in the entire league. And obviously showed that with the Clippers, that might be to some people the peak of his career, but he's had scoring seasons where, he's gotten similar usage to that, where the efficiency has been relatively similar. He played off of so many side actions, off of so many, you know, actions where he's starting low or he's starting on the block and he's coming off a zipper screen and catching it high, or so many Iverson cuts and curls across people's faces. And he just had answers for every way that the defense played it. And that's where I was super impressed, from Norman's perspective. Obviously, the passing for him is relatively limiting. And that passing doesn't just limit him as a player, but he limits him as a scorer. And I also think that Norman's ability to like consistently string together multiple moves isn't as great. I think that's why he has so many like isms. When you watch Norman Powell play, if you watch him long enough, you're gonna pick up on so many habits, because I think a lot of his footwork and a lot of his dribbling combinations are kind of pre-planned. He's not the most creative handler, and I also think that limits him. But that limits him if we're talking about Norman Powell ever running, you know, 15, 17, 18, 19 ball screens. Not if we're talking about Norman Powell being a single side scorer, shot creator, somebody that works with pre-created advantages and finds space and makes jumpers and just does his job generally on that side of the floor. So as a scorer, just I don't know. I don't know what to say. He just gives a different package than almost
Yeah.
anybody that he'd have had, since we signed Jimmy. Like again, like you said, he is in a traditional sense a Duncan replacement, but Norman Powell is somebody who like has more than a handful of just self-created dunks in the half court. I don't think Duncan Robinson in his 8-year NBA career has a single one of those.
Ah, respect dunk, respect dunk.
I'm just saying. I'm just
Respect
saying.
dunk, bro.
I'm just saying. There's this. You can go through the
Man,
tape
I
and you
see
see
Duncan throw down a little bit, man.
in the half court, or you see and off of a closeout. I'm talking Norman. I'm
Just
talking.
creating hezzy tweet, blow by dunk. Okay.
Yeah, I
I'd
think
have to
Norman
think
did.
pretty
Norman
far
probably
back for
did
that.
that like four times, maybe 3 times last year. Duncan's never done it ever, so it's like it's just a different dynamic. It's a different dynamic, and it's a
Yeah.
different, more complete package as a scorer than he have had in a minute. Now, everything else, what he gives you on the boards, not much. What he gives you point of attack, not much. What he gives you off ball, not much. But
Off
I
ball?
mean,
Think he pretty good off ball though.
I'm talking about on defense.
Ah, right, right, right.
Yeah, we already discussed, some of the off-ball juice he gives you offensively. So me personally, I think that Norman is going to play really well this year, and if you can get him at a similar price point to what he currently makes, I definitely wouldn't mind having him long term, because either direction you want to go towards, if you do at some point, which I mean, I think everybody who's listening now highly doubts if they do ever go the tanking route. He's not somebody just gonna single handedly lift up wins or anything like that. He is somebody that definitely needs to play off a quality advantage creator for him to really move winning like that. And he gives whatever young player you have, an outlet. But then if you do want to go the winning route, which is more than likely, he is a role that functionally this offense is going to need in the half court and who gives them way more juice than they've ever had.
think you cutting out a little bit, Eli.
What was the last part you heard?
Uh, you said he'd be like a functional, important part of the offense in terms of future, in
Oh,
terms of
okay.
whether tanking or competing sort of aspect.
So I'm gonna just repeat it. So somebody that can functionally be a part of the half court offense and whatever you want to do there, and then also gives you much needed juice in transition, just as somebody who can rack up 3 point volume there, something that the Heat don't really have, but also someone that can just consistently take it to a defense and put them behind the eight ball, put them in disadvantaged positions. So me personally, I really, really, really liked the Norm trade.
Another thing I wanted to call out, which I forgot too, is that Norm is really good in fourth quarters. He's been really good in fourth quarters. I think particularly his past two seasons. And we saw how we struggled a lot in the fourth quarter, in this past season. And, this year, just to give y'all numbers, he shot 54% in the clutch last year, and he shot 50% from three in the clutch last year. So he's been a guy who, has been able to hit shots during crunch time, and we really sucked at that aspect last year. So he's a guy that, potentially we can rely on and key moments of the game for us to be able to hopefully close out games because it was a number of games that we just had a lot of control over and then weren't able to close out. So hopefully Norm helps us out in terms of, our clutch time offense and helping out in that regard. And then another thing I didn't think I touched on, Norm extension potentially. Um, you know, I think the Heat would like to extend him. I think they like him a lot. And I think he will fit pretty well with the team. And he's a guy who plays with edge too. And I think the Heat, it looks like they want to bring back sort of edge, to the team. And Norm's a guy who plays that way and has that sort of mentality. And I think the Heat want to get back to that sort of identity. Um, he competes, he plays hard. He doesn't really back down. So I think the Heat want to keep returning to sort of that identity. So I think they would like to extend him. I'm not sure if they extend him, in the off, before this season starts, but depending on how this season goes, if it goes pretty well, I think they would definitely bring him back. You know, and then as well, you do have the option to trade him at the trade deadline if, things in terms of he's playing well, but it's not really resulting into wins, and maybe a contender wants him, and you could probably get good assets for him, which the Heat need to kind of start doing in terms of if they ever want to get that big fish, quote unquote. So potentially, you have options in terms of extending him or trading him at the deadline to get some assets. But I think the Heat traded for him with the intent of him being here. And I think if Norm plays pretty well, I think it also gives them, um, this is a topic we're going to discuss soon, but I think it might give them a little bit of leverage in terms of asserting someone's extension. So I think it
Yeah,
makes it really interesting.
yeah. And I just like watching Norm. Like, I don't know, like the way that whenever he runs ball screens, he's kind of just like hopping in the space. It's just
It's
it's
very
just so
rhythmic.
it's
Like
just
he's
so quick
dancing out there,
twitch.
bro.
It's
It's
just so quick
wow.
twitch, and there's like a pace and like you mentioned a rhythm to it, and he has a pretty jumper. I just like watching Norman. But as you stated, moving on from like Norman and the details of his contract, we are currently in the midst of the off season before before the offseason leading into restricted free agency for somebody who some people believe last year was the Miami Heat's best player and is their best player going forward. And that's obviously Tyler Herro. This year, Tyler Herro is making 31 million, which will make up about 20.05% of the cap. And then the next year, he'll make 33 million, but it'll be a lower percentage of the cap at 19.4. And then Hero goes into unrestricted free agency for the first time in his career. Um, Basically, by all measures, Tyler Hero had a career year. I think that he did a great job slowing down his game, breaking it down detail by detail. He didn't necessarily recreate himself, but he just expanded his abilities and the places on the court that he could get to just by breaking everything down detail by detail, um, and just adding more, as we mentioned with Norm, more of that east to west movement to get downhill more. Obviously, this was one of his higher rim rate seasons ever. He almost doubled his rim rate this year from 18.6% to 13.7%. And that was a big part of his success, but obviously the biggest part is going to consistently be what he can do as a shooter, and then moving forward, how he can grow as a general ball handler. What are your opinions on Tyler Hero? What type of contract do you think that his side of the aisle is looking for? And what type of contract do you genuinely think that he's, worthy of?
Um, I thought he had a really good year last year. He really simplified his game in terms of taking a lot more threes and also not even just the threes, but how far back he took a lot of threes. And as well as his floater was really good last year. I think he was shooting like above 50% from floater range. And him getting to the basket too. And he figured out kind of creative ways to draw fouls too. Let's see. I'll be curious to see how he builds on that with a lot of the low pickup, swing through type of move that a lot of guards like to use to get to the line. Um, but in terms of like extension talk, I just don't think they have to extend him this summer. For Hero, this was his best year of his career and also his healthiest year of his career. If I'm, the Heat brass, I want to see him do it again. Before I decide to sort of give out an extension. I want to see him replicate what he's done this past year and staying healthy as well. Because up until I believe this season, I think Embiid actually played more games than Tyler Hero. So I wanted to see if he can actually stay healthy again and also do what he did again. And then we can, come to the table and, do sort of see where extension talks lie there. But I don't think he should get the full 50 max, 50 million per year max. I think the money that I'd be
Under no.
considering, yeah, the money I'd be considering giving him is really going to be relying on how the team looks in regular season and how he looks in the offs. Like, where do we go? If we're a
Yeah.
pretty good regular season team and we get through a couple rounds in the playoffs, and then, yeah, I can see myself giving him maybe 40, 40 to 42. For me, sweet spot would be 35 to 38 or 39. That'd be
Yeah.
where I'd be looking at. But I think having Norm can maybe potentially, if Norm plays pretty well, I think it could really help in terms of not having to give Hero, you know, 45 or, close to 50 or whatever that seems to be. I think for him, he's probably going to want the full 50, which, you should ask. You should never be like, nah, I'm going to, you know, ask for lower than what I'm eligible for. You ask and you see if they give it to you, to be honest. But for me, for the Heat, especially with this new CBA, it's really hard to
Yeah.
build teams around this.
On the heels of the De'Aaron Fox
Yeah, yeah,
contract, nothing would surprise me, but yeah, no.
yeah. And Mikal Bridges, I think he got paid what, 38 million a year, or is it more than that? Can't remember.
I don't remember off the top of my head either.
Yeah,
But
so Hero's going to be looking around at those guys, and if he's able to replicate what he did this year or this past season, he's going to be like, yeah, like I should get more money than that. And I think for the
mm,
Heat, um, I don't think you need to extend him this summer. I don't think you need to have those talks this summer. I think he has this year and he has next year. And we'll come to the table the next offseason and do a diagnostic on how the season went because, last year you can put a lot of blame on the Jimmy thing, that it kind of really threw the season out of whack. Now you get a full training camp with everybody, full opportunity to um, deal with quote unquote the no drama or whatever. It was just a lot of turnover and turmoil last year. So this year You have sort of like a clean slate. So let's see what you look in that sort of environment. Then we can talk about an extension. I just don't see the rush into giving him one this October 1st just because he's eligible. I just don't think you have enough data, in my opinion, to
Hmm.
make a good decision for the future of the
Yeah.
team, the books, because the books are important.
Before, I kind of touch on my opinion on the money, I do just want to, give Hero credit for the type of season that he had last year. Like you mentioned, he had a virtually elite floater season. Now, I do think it's important to contextualize for most of Hero's career, he's a good, not elite floater shooter, and that is something where there's a little bit of variance. But either way, I just think that Hero really learned how to pace his way into the paint. Everything you use the word simplified, I use the word slow, but I think just like a mixture of those. Um, is what he was able to do to just find a way to, like you mentioned, get to the free throw line, get to the rim more. It was just a boost in his general craft. I don't think that he had any big athletic improvement or that his handle got any tighter or that he even
His
got
game
super.
matured. That's
I
what I think it
exactly. I
has.
just think he just everything was reads for him, right? Reactive reads. There's a game specifically that I think is one of the best indicators of, Heroes improved driving. And he missed a lot of rim attempts, but I think when we played the Pacers earlier in the season, I believe in November, Hero started the game with like five straight rim attempts off of drives. And most of them were out of pick and roll. And it was all okay. I'm getting the ball screen. I'm coming off of it. I'm opening my hips. I'm not even going forward. I'm just going to the side, really. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Okay, Miles Turner fully flips his hips to contain Bam. Now I go. Now I get a rim shot. And maybe he, if it's how I remember, he probably missed it. But he just had so many plays like that where he's reading the drop bigs angles, their footwork, and he's just finding effective ways to get to the basket, even through some of his athletic limitations. And he also got really good at you mentioned like manipulation. I think he's just generally one of the more manipulative players in the entire league, and it's not just to get to the free throw line. Like he's using manipulation to create driving angles, right? Where at the nail, he uses little ball fakes, early pickup into a scoop. Now he's at the rim because he used a little pass fake to move the nail defender. He's not somebody with the tight enough or crazy enough handle to consistently beat that defender, and he knows that and he recognizes that, and he uses it around the basket, even little pass fakes to the dunker into a euro to create cleaner looks around the rim. Um, I just think he uses manipulation so well, specifically as a scorer in a way that not many other guys do. And he also improved as a passer
Yeah,
in a couple
I
ways,
was
in my
about to bring it
opinion.
up.
I thought he was a really good skip passer. His
Yeah,
skip passes have really good velocity, relatively good accuracy. And he was, when he's coming off of these ball screens or these DHOs in their space, and he's able to comfortably center himself in the middle of the defense and survey the defense from the position of being in front of it. I thought that he did a relatively good job finding the corners. He's one of the best shooters in the league. He's been one of the best shooters in the league. 37%, 48.6 3-point rate, 4.3 pull-up threes per game. He made 35% of those, pretty good. And then obviously 4.6 catch and shoot threes. He made 40.2% of those, obviously really good. He had a season that he's basically never come close to in terms of what the impact metrics thought of him, right? Hero actually ranked fifth among actual shooting guards. There's some guys that are listed as shooting guards um, for dunks and threes that aren't. But if you remove some of those guys, like Amin Thompson, for example, that's not a shooting guard. But he ranked fifth um, among shooting guards in EPM, and he actually ranked second in the aforementioned estimated wins uh, for shooting guards in the entire league. Then Anthony Edwards at number one. He ranked slightly above guys like Austin Reeves, um, relatively close to guys like Desmond Bain and Devin Booker. And then there's, some role player types like Isaiah Joe or Christian Braun that kind of sneak in there just because, these stats are relatively variable, I should say. And then the season also wasn't something that was like he had like a super hot streak. Do you understand what I'm saying? Where he played a really good 40 games and then he went down from October 23rd to December 4th, the first 20 games of his season. He had a 62.3 true shooting percentage, 27.6 usage percentage. Then from December 7th to January 19th, the next 21 games, he had a 63 true shooting percentage, 26.6 usage percentage. Then he actually has a down stretch from January 23rd to March 10th. The next 20 games, he goes 53.7 true shooting percentage, 30.4 usage percentage. And those first two intervals, he had a 3.2 BPM and then a 3.6 BPM. In that interval, he had a 1.8 BPM. But then in his last 16 games from March 12th through April 11th, he finished the season at 64.4 true shooting percentage, at 27.6% usage, at 4.1 BPM. So he had a relatively consistent year outside of, if you break it down in quarters, outside of one interval, he had a relatively consistent year. And that interval just happened to be in a very specific time in Heat history with a very, you know, a lot of things happening. One of the worst losing streaks in franchise history, obviously. He who shall not be named getting traded, the drama around that. It was a lot going on. So there's that. But then, and I hate to do it, but like this is where it gets negative. It's just like there's just there's just really no way that you can be in contention for the championship if Tyler Herro is making 30, or I guess 50 million would not be 30. If Tyler Herro is making upwards of 25% of your cap, I just don't see it. So that 50 million mark, as you said, like that's completely off the table for me. Even though Hero had the season that he had, there are players in the league who don't demand that salary with just more consistent play. And then I also think that, like I mentioned, some of that stuff is just relative to change potentially. Maybe Hero is just one of the best floater shooters in the entire league, but that's not what the rest of his career indicates. And additionally, the most important part of the Hero conversation always has to come down to what can he do in terms of like leading playoff units? Because it's cool that Hero was able to score when he was able to score. It's cool that he was able to make the improvements as a passer that he did make, but the improvements as a passer that don't show up, diversifying his passing slots and being able to more consistently find interior angles that aren't lob passes, that's basically not a part of his game at all. Um, the way that he reads defenses in terms of when he's attacking from non-advantage situations or he's coming off a ball screen and there's space already pre-created. He does a great job setting up screens, angling defenders, and then playing off of that, right? He's great at rejecting off of hard crosses. He's great at slamming guys into ball screens and then finding a way to snake back middle and going from there. He's great at taking these wide, wonky angles to get defenders off balance and then attacking once their footwork allows an opening for him. He's great at all of that, but he's not particularly great at early pocket passes. He's not particularly a pace pusher. He doesn't necessarily consistently hit heads and stuff like that. As a scorer, yes, Tyler Herro is somebody who plays early in offense. He doesn't necessarily take anybody off of rhythm, which is a good thing. It's a aid to his portability or whatever word you want to use. 16% of his shots came in very early in the shot clock. He had a 62.4 effective field goal percentage in those situations. And then 18.9% of his shots came in early situations. He had a 60 effective field goal percentage. He's a good, just early clock operator. He does that at a high level. but he's not somebody that has a global effect on the team in terms of transition play. And then as a self creator in a playoff series, we just have yet to see Tyler Herro be anything close to a positive. From my count, last playoffs, Tyler Herro had 8 self-created buckets in the half court, and I looked at every shot that he attempted in the playoffs. He had a relatively clean ISO turnaround midi on Jared Allen. He had a pull-up decel 3 on Darius Garland. He had an ISO on Max Strus. He gets to the middle of the floor and knocks down a midi. He had an ISO pullback on Jared Allen. He had a floater off a. I'm not gonna lie, it was off a blatant illegal screen. So there was a pre-advantage created there for him. It wasn't necessarily just like a super creative attempt to create an easy shot or anything like that in the half court. And then he had an ISO on Sam Rule off the cross, off a little half spin. He hits a contested midi on DG. And then his last one is in semi transition. He gets an ISO against Strus. There's no held back line. He blows by him relatively easy. He gets a bucket in semi transition, really. Um, that's it. You go over that Cavs series and game after game after game, it's we're gonna switch the ball screen. We're gonna leave a weaker defender on Tyler Herro, and we're just gonna ask you to prove it. Can you consistently get downhill? Not only get downhill, but once you're downhill, can you consistently make reads? Because we're just gonna put pre-help right here. So this entire you're okay, you're a good floater shooter, you're gonna have to live off those. Because we're sitting on your step back. You don't really have anything once we're on your hip. You don't have like many mid-range counters going east to west. You don't really have that. You have straight line pull-ups against drop. You have turnarounds to some extent, but you don't really have anything going to the side, like a side pull-up from midi. So we're sitting on your hip, and then there's pre-help. There was always pre-help, right? If Bam was in the corner and um Khalil Ware was in a dunker, there was always pre-help. It didn't really matter who was on the court because he was not consistently hitting the pass. Even if it was Alec Burke in the corner, the help was almost always camped. So it was switch everything, keep help camped in the paint. Can he beat us? And it's like he almost never did the entire series. I think that 2 half-court self-created buckets per game in a series where you're consistently seeing Jared Allen on the switch. You're consistently seeing Darius Garland on the switch. You're consistently seeing Max Strus. Evan Mobley is a great defender, but is still a big in space. The elite of the elite creators, the guys that are worthy of $50 million, they definitely they just create cleaner looks. Even the buckets that I named, if you see them, right, the buckets that he was able to score in the half court, almost none of them were clean. And only one of them actually came directly at the rim. So it was nothing going for him towards the basket, something that we kind of thought he improved on in the regular season, which he did, but I mean we know when the sport matters more. And then it was almost no creation for others consistently, at least. Like there were so many times where Struce, or not Struce, but Tyler, that is, just ignored um, you know, plays where yes, it's a relatively easy closeout, but it's a defender that's zoning up on two. They close out the one defender, they kick it to the corner. Maybe he pump fakes, maybe he gets downhill. There were just so many plays with that. There's a drive that I remember on Isaac Coro where I think there's a relatively easy passing route. He drives on him. He gets no separation because he doesn't have the craziest first step. Obviously, doesn't have the strength to move. Isaac Coro is blocked. You know, he was 1 for 10 in the closeout game, and that's
Yeah,
not
I remember that series, like especially, Cleveland's scheme is that they left the weak side corner open the entire time.
exactly. There was
Entire
always
time, and we would just
pre-help.
miss that skip every time. It was nobody really making that read. Um, and that's how Cleveland had to guard, obviously. When you have two small guards, you have to give up somewhere, and they would give up the weak side corner every single possession. of any sort of penetration, and we weren't able to take advantage of that at all. But yeah, I agree with all your thoughts, And another big thing I think throughout that series is that Hero wasn't able to like free himself. You had Max Strus and Sam Merrill, face guarding him, and he wasn't able to ever like really get away sort of from those guys. And this is why I think, Norm could potentially help him out in that regard is because, we love Davion, but Davion isn't that offensive threat, where guys are going to be kind of worried about him. But with Norm in the backcourt, hopefully that alleviates some of that pressure and makes it a little bit easier for Hero to get open. But yeah, he struggled creating a lot. He only had, I think, one good game that series, which was game two. And, game two, a lot of that stuff came from transition, which Hero, likes playing in transition, especially, having opportunity to transition threes, go to the basket off a transition. So the real thing for me is just how he looks in the playoffs, like the regular season stuff, I think was really great this year. I really loved his playmaking. I thought he took steps in that regard. He still was a little bit too turnover heavy in a good portion of games when he was on ball a lot, but his processing, especially his chemistry with Kalel, was really good. He was able to really make some really good skip passes, find a lot of guys open from three. I thought his vision was pretty good. Decision making during clutch time was a whole different thing, but those first three quarters, like Hero played with a lot of maturity, and a lot of poise. And this year with Hero, it's always going to be how do you look in the playoffs? And if he wants 50 M's, he's going to have to um, show some sort of improvement, when it comes down to guys and teams scheming, particularly for him. How are you able to, you know, beat sort of those coverages? And if you can't beat those coverages, then you cannot make 50 M's. I just cannot give that to you. So if he sees himself as that sort of player, then he's gonna have to show it. And if he's able to show it, maybe we can think about the thought of 50 M's. But I think at this moment in time, I don't think you can give him that sort of money. Um, for a team you're looking to potentially build towards being a
Yeah, it's
contender
just
again.
too big of a it's just too big of a
Is
sample of,
that 30? Is that 30% of the cap if he got 50?
no, no, no. I think 30% of the cap is
50?
54, 55, I think.
Okay. So what is that?
But
28? 27?
it might be 30% of the cap. No, 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 no. No. I don't think it'll be 30% of the cap in 2028 because I think that's the max that Luca could sign for, and he's making 55 million in 2028. So I don't 100% know exactly what percentage of the cap it is, but it's obviously over. It's obviously um, a very big. What's the word I'm looking for? Promotion. It's obviously a very big promotion
Pay raise.
for, yeah, a very big pay raise, which Hero did earn. His performance did earn him a promotion, but I think that that's more indicative of like that 35 million range. Maybe if you want to push it to 40, 41, 42, I wouldn't love that, but it's more that's where,
I mean, if he's
his
able to anchor us as being a top 10 offense, then yeah, sure. But, you know, we're bottom 10 offensively. I just don't see
yeah,
why.
it's
You know,
like
yeah.
the people that I think, if you want to argue that Tyler Hero is better than Austin Reeves or whatever, or way better, like, cool. But I do still think that that's somebody that's like relatively a contemporary. He's asking for 30 million. Obviously, when Desmond Bain signed his second contract, this is Tyler Hero's third, so that's fair. But when Desmond Bain signed his third contract, he's making 39.5 million annually. Like, his contemporaries are not getting 50 M's. And his contemporaries would not ask for 50 M's. And it's like, I
Especially
don't,
since he's a one-way sort of player. I think that's limitations
yeah,
there.
we didn't even talk about the
And he's not
defense, but
as and he's not as, I guess, a needle. I don't know, a needle mover as a one offensive player. So if you're not as good as an offensive one and you're not a great defender, I just don't see how I could sort of give you that sort of money. So, you say Desmond Bain making 39, but Desmond Bain has the perception of being a two-way player.
Yeah.
Hero's never really going to have that sort of perception. So that's another,
Yeah.
sticking point you could provide if you're the Heat or whatever. But I don't know. But I don't know.
But obviously, I think, my perception of on him has changed with his play changing. A year ago, I probably would have said like whatever he was asking for, I wouldn't want to give it to him. Like I wouldn't want him to be on the team. I was just trade him. Like, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot of negativity on my end towards Tyler Hero, and I'm still definitely not his biggest fan as a long-term championship piece, but I definitely do think that he's a good offensive player, um, like a very good offensive player, a near all-star level offensive player who can play off of other creators, is a great shooter, is continuing to get better, which is something that you want to see. He had stagnated for a period, but obviously seeing a pretty big jump. And I would be perfectly fine with him being on the team for the long term at the right price point though. If it's 38 million, okay, we have something to talk about. If it's particularly the number that I came up with just by some of those names that I had mentioned that he was like relatively close to in EPM. It's like if you take Austin Reeves is expected to get 30 million. Isaiah Joe signed for 12 million. Desmond Bain signed for 39.5 million. Obviously, Devin Booker 66 $66.6 million annually. Christian Brown signed for 21.5. So it's like the low end of those kind of outdo the outliers, and the average of those five guys ends up at like 33.9. And I think 34 or 35 annually for Tyler Hero would be about what his level of play indicates, right? Now, he would probably push back because he probably thinks that he's better than a couple of these players that are making that. But I mean, is Tyler Hero like substantially better than like Brandon Ingram? Is the high end of Tyler Hero's play, especially when you consider injury injury history as well. Um, like they both have that type of injury history, and it's so consistent for Hero outside of this season, which is where you got have to give him credit, but it's just like you have to you have to show me that you can play 70 games. You have to show me that you're one of the best floater shooters in the league, and that it's not just variance. Um, And you have to show me at some point that you have some type of counter for playoff defenses. Because we've seen you as a playoff tertiary scorer struggle, as a secondary scorer struggle, and now as a primary scorer struggle. It's like it's not entirely a role thing. It's something
I do
inherently
think
wrong with
with
his game.
I do think though, because his role as a tertiary, secondary scorer in the playoffs, his game is different now than what it was those those years. I think I think what happened in the Boston series 2 years ago, first round, really showed him that he had to change the way he played. Hero was a guy who looked up to Booker a lot, and you could tell by his shot diet with the heavy mid-range sort of area that he liked to operate in. And the coaching staff would try to get Hero like, "Hey, we need you to take more threes, take more threes. Like you're a really good shooter, take more threes." But I think for Hero in his mind during those time periods, because he's young, um, didn't want to focus on those areas because those seem like role player things, right? And I think this season it clicked for him in terms of being able to help the team, and then also it helped him have a career year that I need to increase my volume as a three-point shooter. Whether it's I take pull-up threes, transition threes, catch and shoot threes, 30 plus footers. get to the basket, and then if the game is, crunch time or whatever, you get to the midi, you take those midis. But in terms of like your entire shot diet for an entire game, the midis didn't need to be a focus, as you saw his mid-range attempts drastically decreased, especially the long mid-range attempts drastically increased this year, and he increased his three-point rate and increases rim attempts. So I think, for instance, like if Jimmy, didn't get traded as to get traded, I thought going into this playoffs, if Jimmy was there, I think Hero might have probably had a good playoff because he would be able to play off of Jimmy. And I think his game, the way he plays now, would have been more conducive to being able to help or play off of a one. Because I don't think his game is just not similar to what it was, 2, 3 years ago. Here was fighting, to keep taking his middies. Now I think he's gotten to the maturity. He's gotten to a point in his career where it's like, you know what? Like I'm really good shooting threes. It's not a big deal, that I do this. And now it's like he's kind of moved on from looking to Booker to now this whole Steph Curry thing where he watches a lot of Steph film. And you can see that he's pulled some of Steph's game, within sort of what he wants to do. So I think his game is matured, and I think now it'll probably fit a lot better being a tertiary option or secondary with how he plays now. So I would have loved to see it, but you know, the basketball gods had different plans. So
Yeah, that's a fair argument. I do think that I have some agreement with the fact that he probably wouldn't have been as inefficient as he was this playoff run, but I do just genuinely think that when he is schemed for, like the lack of explosion can't be coupled with like the lack of I don't think that he's a bad decision maker or he's like this league worst processor, but I do think that he's somebody who kind of works best with just like these reactive decisions. And he's not somebody that's, putting the chess pieces on the table and consistently doing things
dictating
to,
terms.
yeah, he's not a proactive playmaker at this stage. And I kind of think when you don't have like the burst to consistently get by your guys. You're not like he's relatively flexible, but he's not like the bendiest guy or has like the craziest herky jerky game or the tightest handle. It's just the level of advantage creation that he's missing. And I think that the only way to supplement that is, like you talked about, his threes went up. They did, but it's like the only way, the only step for him to take is for him to take even more. I'm not gonna lie. That's the conclusion that I've come to, right? He literally
Hell,
he might just have to be a a guy who takes like 11 threes per game. That might just be the only route for him. And I don't know if that it doesn't seem like a willingness thing at this point. I think it might just be like a that's genuinely like a lot to ask for, and it's hard to get up that many threes, and there's like a
yeah.
certain amount of plays that have to be dedicated to you, stuff like that. But I think that the most realistic pathway for any more Tyler Hero improvement than what we've
They'd
seen
have to
so
play
far.
faster to get up that amount of threes for sure.
Yeah,
So
that's
we'll
true.
see. Can't slow methodical things people like to do. Can't do that if that's what they're looking for, especially between Norm. Ideally, I think if it's me, you probably want them taking at least 10 per, 10,
Bro.
10 3-point attempts per
You
game.
combined?
No, both of them, each
Oh yeah, yeah,
getting
yeah.
up at least 10.
Bro,
Combined, hell no.
yes, I was just gonna say, no, I want to be the most high volume shooting backcourt in the entire league. Because what else is the point of having two 40% shooters? And if you're at a talent disadvantage, if you're at a talent disparity in some of these matchups, bet on the math. Just bet on the math. That's what I want to see from Hero. And then I'll consider some of the things that, we're talking about from a salary standpoint. I need you to not be one of the best shooters in the league. I need you to show that you could just flat out be the best shooter in the league. Because when it comes to speed of release and the way that he's able to adjust his release and his arm slides as a shooter, everything from an eye test perspective, that I look at and I just shooting by, it says that Tyler Herro should be one of the five best shooters in the league, and he's not that. So I want to see him be that. So, but I think that's enough words spoken on Hero. And I think we basically touched on everything when it comes to moves from the Miami Heat so far. In the future we will touch on potential Nikola Jokic extensions and
Jokic.
our
I know we got Jokic on the team.
oh my God, come on, man. Potential Nikola Jovic
Oh man,
extensions and um our expectations for the play of young players like recently drafted Yakonis Kasparis. Did I say it right?
I think it's Kasparis Yakuchonis.
Yeah. Is it Yakachonis?
Yeah, Yakuchonis. I think it is. I think.
Yeah, he has the most random name ever.
Oh man.
Our expectations for him,
We didn't even talk
and
about
for a couple
the
more young
Fontecchio
players.
edition because that technically happened in the off season. But
Yeah, but they're like planning on cutting him.
I don't think they are. I'm not sure. I think if
You
they
think
do
that
cut
report
him,
is cap?
I think so. I could see a world where this he has a really good training camp and he beats out some guys for minutes to start.
Yeah, he had a good 2023 season.
Yeah, he didn't play too well last year, but the year
He
prior,
played
pretty
well in
good.
2023, yeah.
Yeah.
But or 2023, 2024, that is.
Hmm.
But before we end, um, this is the Culture Chatter podcast. We usually talk about basketball, but I actually wanted to ask you a non-basketball question.
Oh
Is that
no.
okay?
What you got for me?
What have you been listening to lately? In the time since we last potted,
Listening
what
to.
music have you been enjoying?
I
There have been a
listened
lot of
to
releases.
I listened to Freddie Gibbs' new album, Alfredo 2. I really loved it. I've replayed that album probably 5 times already. It's really good tape. I love Freddie Gibbs, so and then plus you get the Alchemist. They just make really good music together. So I've been jamming out to that for the past week or so.
Okay, Freddie Gibbs, Alfredo too. Understandable. Understandable. And chat, if you want to know what I've been listening to lately, um, sadly I have not listened to the Freddie Gibbs album. I don't even know why. But I did. I thought the Clips album was cool. It wasn't the craziest thing I've ever heard, but I've been listening to it relatively often. Um, mostly chat. I can't say the name of the artist I've been listening to a lot, but
Yeah, you have a centric
just,
taste, so
just though he got it, just though he got pretty crazy alleys. He got pretty crazy alleys. And then what else? What else have I been listening to? I'm trying to think, bro. Oh, guys, I'm trying to get y'all albums. I've been listening to Soft Baby a lot. Some of his past work. Do It for Demons, Squid-tastic. I've been listening to a lot of Soft Baby. Um, yeah, that's mostly what I've been listening to lately.
quick quick Miami Heat basketball question for you. They got the Heat over under at 38 and a half, I believe. You going over under?
That's for another episode, bro.
All
That's
right,
for
all
another
right, all
episode.
right, all right. It was quick thoughts.
Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for supporting. 1110, is there anything that you would like to promote?
Nah, just follow the Twitter page for the pod at Culture Chatter. If you want to follow me, you can at Com Coherence on Twitter. And stay tuned for upcoming episodes, hopefully. Hopefully it's not a long time that we chatter next time. So
I highly doubt that it will be. And as you mentioned, follow the team page. Additionally, you can always follow at Flawless like Eli. That's always an option, but most of you probably already do. And then from there, that's it. All right.